From the Gulf States newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm senior reporter Drew Hawkins, chopping it up this week. You've probably heard about the opioid crisis. If you're a person living in America, there's really no way you haven't. And chances are you know someone, a friend, a family member, maybe even yourself, who's been touched by the crisis. And you may have also heard about opioid settlement funds. That's the billions of dollars flowing to local governments from legal settlements with opioid manufacturers and distributors. In Louisiana, Jefferson Parish, right next door to New Orleans, has the most opioid overdose deaths than any other parish in the state. And that's why it's also getting the largest share of the state's opioid settlement funds. So how is it spending it? To dig into it, I teamed up with Katie Jane Fernelius. She covers local government and politics for Verite News in New Orleans. And our story just came out last week, so today we're going to talk about what we found out. So thanks for joining me, Katie.
Thanks for having me.
I am really excited to talk about this reporting project that we've been on. I mean, it's been a journey.
It definitely has. I think we first started talking about potentially collaborating last year. You know, it's kind of a perfect partnership here. I cover city government, and I'm often buried in budget spreadsheets and following the money. And you cover public health, and you've done a lot of reporting on addiction and opioid settlement money.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a perfect dream team here. We both live in New Orleans as well, so we're both right next door to Jefferson Parish. So we are familiar with, the sort of like intangible cultural differences between the two parishes. I mean, they are very different places, but I think a good place to start here would be for people who might not be familiar. Can you tell us a little bit about Jefferson Parish?
Yeah, Jefferson Parish is this suburban parish just outside New Orleans. And a lot of people move there for lower property taxes, better schools, and quieter neighborhoods. It also leans a little bit more conservative, but it has a pretty striking distinction. It has the highest rate of opioid-related overdose deaths in the entire state. More than 1,100 people have died from drug overdoses there in just the last 5 years.
I've looked at that number, 100 times now as we've been working on this project, and it's still just as staggering. And I think that before we started this, I suspected that Jefferson Parish had a lot of opioid overdoses. I mean, I knew about there were so many opioid prescriptions here. I remember that reporting, but I had no idea how many people were dying because of these overdoses.
Yeah, the overprescribing was insane. And as you know, overprescribing often has a direct correlation later on to overdose death rates. Right. According to reporting from the Washington Post, from 2006 to 2012, 190 million prescribed opioids were distributed in Jefferson Parish, which is more than any other parish in the state. For comparison, in New Orleans, that was about 50 million pills during that same time frame.
Just another staggering number. And yeah, that overprescribing, it basically evolved into the full-blown opioid crisis that we're in now. So that's why Jefferson Parish is getting the most money, right? Because of how impactful it's been here. They've got the most overdoses, so they're getting the largest share of funds from a bunch of lawsuits that make and market and distribute opioids,
Yeah, exactly. And the way that settlements work in Louisiana is kind of weird. We're unique among states in that we are distributing all of our opioid settlement money to local governments. So that means that money isn't going to, for instance, the State Department of Health. That means that it's not going to state initiatives to address this crisis. It's just going to local governments. And parishes with larger populations and those that are harder hit by the crisis get more money. So for Jefferson Parish, that means more than $65 million over roughly the next 2 decades. And that is the largest allotment of any parish in Louisiana. And the thing is, this money is really this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It really lets these governments do something about the opioid crisis. So we wanted to look into that. And we got a hold of Jefferson Parish's annual budgets, plus reports on how they were spending this money. And it was really great to team up and dig into those reports together.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the heart of what we were looking into here is where is that money going and where is it gone? And the short answer really at this point is they haven't spent much of it yet. The one major commitment that they've announced is $17 million to build a new drug court building. And there was also $216,000 that went to an architectural firm for design work on that new drug court building. But aside from that, there's $500,000 that went to a homeless services center. But that's kind of the extent of what they've spent so far.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's worth saying here that they started receiving money in 2023, and this is a crisis that is still happening and still impacting people, and they spent very little of it.
Right.
But what they have announced, right, is constructing this new drug court building. And I think it's worth stopping here and kind of just helping people understand what drug court is.
Absolutely. Yeah. The floor is yours.
So drug court is basically a specialty court that offers people in jail on nonviolent drug charges an alternative to incarceration. Instead of going to prison, you're offered probation and enrolled in a treatment-based program. And that program involves drug screenings, group therapy, and regular check-ins with a judge. It typically lasts about 18 to 24 months for folks. And Drew, we actually talked to someone who went through it. Your friend Jeffrey Alford.
Yeah, we did. And, you know, it's kind of a funny story. I'm sure you remember this, how we met him. But we were leaving an interview with Jefferson Parish officials. And, you know, you and I are sort of just chatting in the parking lot, game planning, you know, debriefing essentially. And then out of the corner of my eye, I see this guy looking at us. And I realized that, hey, I know that guy. I've known Jeff for years. And he and my brother actually both work in the recovery space now. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of people have a personal connection to the opioid crisis, right? So you and I are leaving the building, and Jeff is walking into the building for his work day, and he's carrying his lunch and everything. And so I reached out to him, and you and I met up with him for coffee on Manhattan Boulevard before one of his shifts. Can you tell me what you had for breakfast today, Jeff?
I actually had a muscle milk with 33 grams of protein in it.
Okay. It turns out that Jeff actually went through drug court in Jefferson Parish. So he's been in recovery for 3 years now, and he's a peer support specialist working for the parish. So in that capacity, in that job, he uses his own experience with opioid addiction to connect with people who are still struggling, to connect them to resources and help them.
Being more person-centered than it would rather be as like a police officer would handle a situation.
So we're going to get into drug court and Jefferson Parish and all that, but I do want to say that what's really interesting here as well is that Jeff's own journey with addiction in many ways mirrors the opioid epidemic itself.
That's right. And, you know, this is something I actually learned in this reporting project. You know, I came into this as a government reporter. That's part of why I teamed up with you, is because you're a public health reporter. And one of the things that's really great about our job is that we get to learn new stuff. And in this particular case, you know, I learned about the 3 waves of the opioid crisis, which I'm guessing you probably already knew about.
Yep, very familiar with it. It's the first wave there is the overprescribing of pain pills, right? Your OxyContin, your Purdue Pharma. That's the stuff people may have seen or heard about on TV shows like Dope Sick, right? Well, for Jeff, he started taking roxycodone, which is a prescription pain pill. So there's your wave 1, right? But then those pills started to dry up. The government started cracking down on opioid prescriptions. They just became more expensive and harder to get. So Jeff, like many other people, he switched to heroin, which was wave 2 of the opioid epidemic. And here's how he put it.
And because Roxys were getting so expensive and, you know, it was so hard to get, it was like, hey, heroin's the same, you know? And so I went down that path. But then fentanyl kind of really came on the street.
And that's where we get to wave 3 with synthetic opioids like fentanyl, which really flooded the illicit drug supply. I remember Jeff saying he started using those too, whether he realized it or not.
You didn't know what you were getting. You thought you were getting heroin, but you were actually getting fentanyl. You thought you were getting this, but you were actually getting fentanyl.
So Jeff struggled with addiction for years, and eventually he ended up getting arrested in Gretna in Jefferson Parish. But he was given a choice. He could go to prison at Angola, or he could choose the drug court route, which, I mean, it seems like an easy choice, right? So that's what he did. He chose drug court. And he does credit drug court with giving him a chance, you know, this off-ramp from addiction. But he also had real reservations about it.
That's right. And this is kind of the tricky part of this reporting, really digging into how good of a decision it is to invest in a new drug court building. Because it's not this, like, obviously good or obviously bad choice, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. For Jeff, he said the focus of it often felt more like strict compliance than actual recovery. Any misstep, a failed drug test, a missed appointment, it could land you back in jail or extend your time in the program. He also said he had to pay $200 a month to participate, which added up to thousands of dollars. And his big point, though, was that a new building, it doesn't change any of that. He believes that the money would be better spent on expanding access to recovery resources.
The system itself's got to change. I mean, you get a new building, you're putting the same people in it. You're doing the same thing. There's no reform. There's no change.
And Katie, we talked to a few experts about this as well, about using opioid settlement funds for drug courts specifically. Can you talk a little bit about what we learned there?
Yeah, definitely. So we talked to Jonathan Stoltman, who runs the Opioid Policy Institute and tracks how communities are spending opioid settlement money nationwide. And for him, he said that Jefferson Parish's approach raised a pretty fundamental question.
When I think of money spent on a drug court, my first question is always how was that identified as the most pressing need for this money?
Yeah, when we talked to Stoltman, he said the first thing that any community should do before spending settlement money is a needs assessment, basically a survey of what resources exist and what's missing in the public health space.
The crisis was a crisis because we had no public health infrastructure to respond to it, or the public health infrastructure was inadequate.
So, like you said earlier, drug courts aren't necessarily a bad use of funds. But the issue for Stoltman is that they only reach people who have already been arrested. So that leaves out, everybody else, right, that's struggling with addiction, who don't have access to resources and haven't encountered the criminal justice system.
Right, exactly. I mean, Stoltman really echoed what we heard from Jeff, that a new drug court building won't fix the underlying problem.
A judge isn't a doctor. And when we think about a medical issue, we should be having people working with doctors, not with judges.
And Jefferson Parish's own public health officials also had concerns too, right?
Right. Sarah Babcock, who advises Jefferson Parish on public health, actually sent a memo to parish leadership in 2022 recommending that they use the money for things like harm reduction, expanding naloxone distribution, helping to increase, access to medication-assisted treatment, and even hiring a behavioral health coordinator for the parish. The new drug court building was not on her list. We asked her about this, and here's what she said.
Drug court itself does not provide any of the services. To get treatment, people are still having to go to the same community services that everyone else is trying to get into.
Right. And this is, I think, a really important point here, that drug court doesn't actually give you treatment. It can just tell you, or, really order you to get treatment. But you still have to find a program and actually get into it. And, as public health officials that we talked to told us, those options can be limited in Jefferson Parish. And what's interesting also about Babcock, that the Jefferson Parish public health advisor, is before she had that job, she worked at the New Orleans Health Department, which has had much lower opioid overdose deaths. Can you talk a little bit about what New Orleans did differently?
Yeah, the differences are pretty huge. So I know you've reported on harm reduction a bunch. This idea that if you can't stop people from using drugs, you can at least reduce the harm of use.
Exactly. Like many people I've heard say, you can't get into recovery if you're dead, right? And harm reduction can help keep you alive and from getting sick with things like naloxone or Narcan, fentanyl test strips, needle exchanges, things like that.
Exactly. So New Orleans built out harm reduction infrastructure pretty early, most notably doing really wide distribution of naloxone. And when settlement money started coming in, they actually conducted a needs assessment, that thing that Stoltman talked about and recommended, to figure out where the gaps were before committing the funds. Jefferson Parish hasn't done any of that. Here's Babcock again.
Jefferson Parish has, in many ways, moved slower to address it.
I'm curious to get your thoughts about this. Based on the people we talked to, all the research, all the reporting we did on Jefferson Parish, do you think there are any signs that they might shift course on this?
Yeah, I actually do. The thing that we identified, which is that a lot of this money hasn't been spent yet, is also a huge opportunity, right, for those who want it to be spent more on public health. And there's been some movement. Public health officials say that they're pushing for more money to go toward medication-assisted treatment and peer support services, hiring more people with lived experiences of addiction, people like Jeff, for instance. And the parish is conducting a broader community health assessment right now, which will provide them a lot of information about their public health infrastructure.
Now, what about parish officials? And, I do recognize this is a loaded question because I know the answer.
We've been on this project for months, and we've reached out multiple times to Jefferson Parish President Cynthia Lee Shang, but she did not respond to our request for comment, and neither did any of the 7 members of the Jefferson Parish Council. Instead, they pointed us to public health officials who, certainly provide a lot of information, but hold no official decision-making power over how the parish allocates these settlement dollars.
Well, Katie, even though this topic is hard, it was a pleasure working with you and digging into it with you.
Same here. I had, to your point, fun is a weird word to use, but it is always great to be able to work with great people on important projects.
Katie Jane Fernelius covers local government and politics for Verite News, and you can find our full story, read the full investigation at veritenews.org and wwno.org. But wait a second, Katie, before you go, I know we were just talking about how it's normally not fun, really, with some of the difficult subjects that we're covering. But we do end the show with a segment called Gulf States Gems. And it's supposed to be, a lighthearted thing that comes at the end. And it's a chance to shout out and highlight something that we love about the region. Bookstore, park, person, restaurant, whatever comes to mind for you. So I know this is a heavy topic and we've been working on this for months, but I am curious if anything stands out to you as a gem that you'd like to highlight.
Yes, it is summertime. My nephews come to visit every summer, and I love to take them to the pool. And I just want to remind everybody that we have public pools. They are free. Their hours are posted online. And when you go there, they even have goggles and kickboards and pool noodles for use. It is so much fun, and we always have a blast going. And when they're here, they make me and my husband take them almost every single day.
This week's show is cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. Again, I'm your host, Drew Hawkins. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stir your roux.